Hello, family, and welcome to Iron Sharpens Iron Council. This is Trey following through with a little bit more information since our last video on jurisdiction. Kind of want to get into a little bit more detail about where jurisdiction comes from in natural law. But before I get too deep into that, we're also going to talk about the agency relationship, what it means to have the fiduciary duty of care, and where this idea of the fiduciary duty of care comes from, like who puts it together, because I think that it's important to know how these people come up with their concepts in order for us to have a better understanding on what it is they're trying to do versus what you need to be doing. So I just thought we would get this together and kind of go through it like a little series so that you can better understand agency and fiduciary duties and what it is exactly you're really dealing with. A lot of people don't seem to talk about much, or perhaps they're not really in the total understanding that when we're dealing in these types of courts like family court and such, we're dealing in natural law. I've tried to talk with other people about it, but it doesn't seem to really resonate. So I'm hopefully going to be able to clarify in this video why it's natural law when we're talking about anything that is tied to the Social Security. So every time you're in court, there is some sort of Social Security federal grant and aid, and that is for social health, social science, social everything. So when you think about society and the way we behave towards each other in society, that's why we have this Social Security. So we'll get into that another time a little bit deeper, but understand that when we're involved in all these courts, they all have one thing in common. They are collecting grant funds from Medicaid, and typically it is all things that are in the best interest of the public or safety of the public health and well-being, and that is a social political issue, not one of the kind of law you are typically thinking exists. You know, when we think about what the law says as it's written, this is more of a science and more of, like I said, natural law concepts that leads the so-called government to a particular duty of care that they believe by customs of your community is a fair way of kind of regulating each different occupation that you're in. So to understand that a little bit deeper, you have to also understand a little bit about persons, corporations, associations. So a lot of information out there about how we are dealing with corporations. Oh no, it's a corporation. Don't deal with a corporation. It's, you know, this, that, and the other. So hopefully this will bring some clarity as to what that really means and how it actually operates. So the governments, you know, as quick as we are to jump on the corporation issue, it's a corporation and you don't have to listen to it. You know, I heard so many different aspects of that. This is not advice in any way. This is just to help you understand better why the corporations exist, how they became to be, and what it is that they're trying to accomplish. When we're dealing in corporate statuses, as they call it, this is not always what it appears to be or has been discussed that I can tell. So hopefully this will bring this topic to a close. But when we're thinking about each of our departments, okay, so each of those departments, you have the Department of Health and Human Service, you have the Department of Transportation, Department of Commerce, Finance, Agriculture. Each of these departments are organized to govern that particular portion of your life. So when we're thinking about agriculture, we think mostly about food and land. And this particular department is designed to come up with a way to regulate how we do business with each other when dealing in food and in land. There are several committees within that department, and from those committees are professionals or PhD people who have a higher level of experience and knowledge in that particular field, and therefore they are charged with the duty to design a way that we can grow and exchange food, and what it would look like to keep it safe, and how much land one can hold and why, to make it equal amongst all parties who are interested in conducting business within our society under those pretenses. So if we are talking about food, then we're also talking about safety. So they have to regulate all the growers who give our food to our communities in order to assure the safety of the public from any growers who might be poisoning or not properly handling the food that would make the public sick. Now, this is not something that they protect individuals ever from, okay? That's none of these departments are designed to protect an individual. It is solely designed to protect public health, public safety. So when they do things that we don't like, say like use insecticides on our food, and we know that the chemicals on that food are not healthy for the body, what they do then is they weigh in what is more important, your individual rights, your individual perception, or the whole public. So this is why it's not individually based. Just because you may not like the fact that you have chemicals on your food, you think it's unhealthy, we're going to overrule your thought, your ideal, because on this team in the agricultural department, we have professionals, experts who not only know about what kind of food can be grown in this area and how much can be distributed and all of that, but we also have chemists who know which chemicals are going to react in your body which way and how much chemicals your body can handle before it has an adverse effect. So that would be, kind of a general overview of the Department of Agriculture. But to simplify, I'm going to get more into the Department of Health and Human Services and as it relates to us and our children, because I have a pretty good article that I think is helpful in gaining a little bit better understanding. Okay, so what we're going to look at is a journal that was written in regards to the fiduciary model of parental regulation. Yes, parents are regulated, your job title as parent basically, but not when you get paid for. So the Health and Human Services Department is filled with psychologists and medical professionals who come together in a committee and make the determinations for the people of the community on how a child should be raised. They develop a fiduciary model, or a standard instruction on what they believe the commoner should know when it comes to raising children. So they create this kind of outline about how you're supposed to parent and what you're not supposed to do. And then they develop what you know now as the statutes that are relative to that design. So you might be looking at the Marriage and Dissolution Act or the Juvenile Act that lays out this outline of your standard duty of care that is expected of you, specifically designed by these professionals based on human subject research that they've conducted to determine what parents in your community customarily believe child welfare looks like. So you may have a community that believes that spanking is necessary for a child, but the other part of the community says, no, it's not. So when the community is divided like that, or how they know this is because they conduct human subject research, or what's called community-based participatory research, to find out what it is that your community believes, spanking yes or spanking no. So once they've determined what the community's customary beliefs are, they can now outline the standard duty of operational care as a parent. This is relevant to everything you do in life. This is how they design the fiduciary model as a driver, occupying a dangerous piece of equipment, basically. So you're operating this dangerous piece of equipment, and a certain standard needs to be laid out in order for you to do so safely, in order to protect the public from that vehicle harming or damaging them. And this is what is your fiduciary duty while driving. And as a parent, when we look to those specific enactments and others, it is designed by the so-called professionals to determine what it looks like for a parent to do the right job, to produce offspring that are productive in society, and that will not later be a waste to society or a harm to society based on the way they were raised. So all these people have conducted studies over decades to basically research how children grow up when they're abused, what happens to them as they go along their life. And that is sort of the purpose of these departments and your vital statistics, because this tracks the baby's life from birth all the way through adulthood, in order to be able to conduct an analysis of how that baby, what that baby's outcome of life ended up being. So first we have to run the project, or demonstration project is what it's called, to determine, is there actually a negative or adverse effect on a child when they are abused or neglected in certain types of ways that the psychologist may have believed were abusive. So if we have a child who has separated parents, do we know that the outcome of the child's life will be adverse to society because of that separation? And if we determine that, yes, the separation of parents means that the child is definitely going to have some sort of emotional disturbances, we now need to find a way to counteract that kind of trauma in order to help the child grow so that he can be a productive member of society in the future. This is what they refer to as being improving the outcomes. Okay, so this is science. This is not law, and in the way that you think, it's natural law, but it is more scientific based than it is constitutional based. So after we've determined over a period of study that most children, X amount of children who come from a separated family, struggle with emotional disturbances when they're older, and maybe they can't keep a job, they struggle with their own relationships. So the psychologist will come to that conclusion, and then they will create or add to the fiduciary model, determining that when parents separate, the child now becomes dependent on the state to serve their needs to prevent this emotional disturbance. And this is what is called dependency. So once a child is deemed dependent, the state is now required to have service offerings to help the child psychologically get through this turmoil in order to protect their future outcome. And that is the courts we are in. And it doesn't matter, again, I'm using the parent model because it's easier for me to explain, because there's many roles that we play. And that's when we're talking about corporations, associations, and persons, this is what it is. So you as an individual have many persons. You wear many hats in the occupation of life. So we know that when one is occupying life, we know that you're going to have a bunch of different duties to a bunch of different people, and in a whole bunch of different ways. So you are going to be a citizen who has duties and obligations to society, and that's where your Social Security Administration kicks in. So you're basically involved in a social compact where you are saying that you're going to behave yourself in a way that prevents harm to your neighbors, prevents any kind of breach of peace, basically. So if I'm a citizen who wants to keep the peace, then I'm going to behave a certain way, or I will be in breach of peace. So this is most of the time behind the scenes that they're not telling you what's really occurring, what the real foundational problem is. So all of this is developed from a treaty, international treaty, and it goes to the United States signing those treaties, and then the states adopt them, and then your local communities adopt them as well. So this is where my problem therein lies. So we have a panel of people sitting at the UN that come from many different countries that have completely different cultures. And we're taking advice from these people on how to raise our children and other parts of our life, which I have a lot of reasons I won't express as to why I'm disgusted by that very thought. But take a look who sits on the panel and what they're about, and I'm sure you'll agree. So we have all these people that come together who consider themselves to be what are called philosophy kings. And they are the ones who have been researching through science how all these different countries and states behave when it comes to children. I mean, each different country is going to have a different idea, so we can't stipulate the same fiduciary duty of care on an African child that we would stipulate on an American child, because we have completely different cultural beliefs. So you can't say that an African mother should not spank her children if all African mothers know they need to spank their children because that's their convicted belief in their religion. That's their culture. But you also then can't come into the United States and say that spanking is something that we accept, because we know that most people listening to psychologists and such believe that spanking does in fact cause adverse effects on the child's psyche. So different countries, different ideas. I'm not into it. But once that has been said, the idea of it is to maintain world peace. So if all of us are individually hurting each other through ways that harm the psyche, this is kind of an interference in the law of nature to maintain the peace. As long as we're combative against each other, then we will continue to hurt each other. So we need someone to educate us on what the right thing to do is, the right way to behave, the right way to treat each other in all these different aspects of our lives, so that we can live amongst each other in a peaceful, harmonious way. So if all of us think the same way, if we all follow the same fiduciary model, then all of us will feel equal, and therefore we will keep the peace and will be less likely to experience civil unrest. So I hope that makes sense. It's a lot to get into as to why and how they've come to the whole natural law model, but it is what it is. So I'll probably do something more in depth on that, on how we got to that point. But today I'm going to try to keep the scope in what it means to have these different duties, these different occupations in life, and how they are structured and designed based on community belief, and then why we get into a court of enforcement in order to force us to believe something different. So if I 20 years ago believed in spanking my child, my belief has now been changed. I no longer believe I should spank my child. Why? Because you'll see that they actually do marketing projects. Health and Human Services will start putting out there that spanking your child causes for adverse outcome in his life. It's humiliating, it's whatever. So it affects the way he operates in life in the future. And therefore, as those advertisements keep coming out, as we keep hearing those things, we now change the cultural belief of the community. So 20 years ago, I may have spanked my child. But if I spank my child today, then I am now in breach of peace because we have grown in our education to understand that this is bad for the child. And now I'm in breach of peace because I'm not following the cultural standard duty of care of my community. And that hurts my community in many ways that I won't get into, but it has a lot to do with economics mostly. So understanding just this very basic concept will help you to understand what persons are and who is your so-called rulers. And these people, like I said, they are professionals who are also known as white men. Some people call them elites, higher educated, whatever you want to call them. In the end, it's all the same thing. They have done all this research and scientific study, and therefore they know better than you. And therefore you are dependent upon them to teach you how to do things correctly. And that's what all of this is about. It's about educating the population to believe on a peaceful resolution in each aspect of their lives and to prevent people from getting fiery, from, rising up, from doing things the way they want to or have done in the past based on the belief of these professionals. So we'll kind of get a little deeper into that in a minute, but I'm going to go over the fiduciary model of parenting just so that you can kind of grasp it and understand what it means to have that role. Okay, so when we're reading into this journal, understand that this is a research project. They're constant, every day, kind of like the Truman Show. We're being watched, analyzed, mostly through data exchange and data storage, which is what the departments are. The Department of Health and Human Services monitors the way babies grow up from the time they're born up until adulthood so that they can come up with reasoning behind why they want to create more regulation over parenting. So this is very science driven, and once you understand that there's science behind it and what the science is, it becomes very easy to find this kind of information. So I'll read a little bit into this. So she's saying that my aim in this essay is to offer both a positive and normative account of these legal trends. In the beginning, she was at this journal, she's just talking about how we've come to be over-regulating the role of the parent. So the short form of my argument is as follows. Most of these law reforms, the ones regulating the parent-child relationship upon divorce or dissolution, can be understood as unplanned but coherent efforts to encourage divorcing parents to function more like parents in intact families rather than in traditional roles of divorced parents. This goal is most likely to be achieved if parents are motivated to continue to identify their interests with those of their children and to maintain their commitment to fulfilling parental responsibilities. The reforms regulating dissolution of the intact family, the substantive and procedural innovations, and the emphasis on domestic violence can be understood as encouraging appropriate parental attitudes and behavior through a regulatory regime that, in effect, treats parents as fiduciaries entrusted with their children's welfare. A fiduciary model of parental regulation recognizes the importance of respect and autonomy in encouraging parents to dedicate themselves to their children's interests. So what she's ultimately saying here is that that's not our normal, natural interest. We don't really like putting our kids first. We don't know how to. We're not smart enough to. And this is somewhat true. If you've ever been through a divorce, a lot of times we get caught up in the breakup and in all of the anger, and then, we're not really thinking about what is best for the child when it comes to who's going to see him or her and when and all these different things. So when they talk about encouraging, to help us, to encourage us to appropriately behave the way they believe we should, they're going to control our behavior through intervention and court. Typically, this would not be constitutional. This would not be of your own free will. And so they know that this is not something that you would willingly participate in. And so they have to create an environment that would force you to participate, but at the same time, let the record show that it was voluntary, willful in nature. So a fiduciary model of parent regulation recognizes the importance of respect and autonomy in encouraging parents to dedicate themselves to their children's interests. Ask any parent who's been through a divorce if anyone encouraged them to do anything. I'm going to say probably not. So by giving the third parties custody and visitation rights without full parental status, for example, threatens the law's goal of promoting children's welfare through parental dedication. Thus, perhaps counterintuitively, reforms that seem to reinforce parental rights serve to protect children's interests, whereas those that are designed to promote the child's interest in relationships with important parent-like adults threaten to frustrate the child's most important bond, the relationship with her caregiving parent. The model of parents as fiduciaries that informs my analysis is one that Robert Scott and I developed in the Virginia Law Review article several years ago. We argued that the relationship of parent and child has a lot in common at a deep structural level with those of fiduciaries and principals in other legal contexts, and that to a considerable extent, the regulation of the parent-child relationship conforms to a fiduciary model. Like other fiduciaries, trustees, executors, guardians, corporate directors, and managers, etc., parents are agents whose legal responsibilities give them authority to make decisions that affect the interests of people who are not capable of looking out for their own interests or of monitoring whether the fiduciary is doing a good job. The law's challenge is to encourage parents to act in the interests of their children rather than in their own selfish interests. Towards this end, in regulating the intact family, lawmakers have relied to a substantial degree on relatively effective and inexpensive informal mechanisms to constrain parental discretion and to encourage parents to fulfill their obligations. Parents are compensated for doing a satisfactory job through legal deference to their authority. When the intact family breaks down, however, lawmakers traditionally have restricted parental authority and substituted more costly formal mechanisms to monitor behavior and encourage parental compliance. An unintended effect of this treatment may be to exacerbate parental dissatisfaction, leading to a downward spiral of detachment and disinterest that is destructive of the parent-child relationship. So what she's kind of getting at here and explaining in a nutshell is when we are wearing our parent hat, the Department of Health and Human Services has designed through their psychiatrists and doctors a model that we need to follow, and if we don't follow it to a T, then the government will reduce our rights as that fiduciary to the child, as that trustee, and they will now take over. This is what it means to have a dependent child. So the first thing that happens in court when you go into a family court is the judge will establish parentage that is deliberate. It is to prove or to evidence in the fact on the record that a fiduciary duty of care actually has been established and exists, and that the parent or mother, father is acting as a parent at all times when they were taking care of the offspring. So this means that this is your person, okay? So you are a man, a woman, and then we have personalities with different scopes of duties when we wear our different hats. So outside of being a man or a woman, you are first the citizen. So the citizen is a part of a social compact known as Social Security. Okay, we are all participants and contributors and beneficiaries into this Social Security, Medicaid, and labor funds. So all of us have to participate in order to make the entire thing work. We all have to contribute, and we all have to remain within the scope of our duties so we don't breach the peace amongst the community. Because if we did that, everybody would be up in arms and they would have a heart attack about it and start bothering our local community law enforcement. We don't want that. Just stay in line. Stay in this particular scope of behavior so that we don't have to come in and encourage you to do it, to fulfill those obligations that we lined up here for you. And this is relevant to every person or personality that you have. So when you are driving, you were educated by the Department of Transportation because they have experts in the field of public safety while operating motor vehicles. They have done the science and the research, and throughout the years have maintained that science and research to determine how to make the roads most safe for all the public. And therefore, because of their expertise, we are now submissive to their will because they know more than we do. And this is your status. So when people are talking about status and correcting your status, this is what it means. Your status is basically a student. You are a student that is governed and regulated by experts, and because they know more than you, that makes them of a higher level of status than you. And that's where we were talking in the last video about color of authority and color of law. So we are now, by execution, expression, and implication, agreeing that it is better to listen to the experts than to rely upon ourselves and our own teachings because we don't know enough to operate in that status. So when you hear people talking about change your status and correct your status and you're not with the right status and standing, this is actually where we are on the ladder or in the hierarchy of things to them. So I have many ways of questioning that, or I could disagree with it a billion times over. But this is, again, not supposed to be legal advice or anything like that. This is just to help you understand from the other side how they see you, why they see you that way, and why we are talking about persons. So in order for them to govern all these different personalities that we have, in order to protect the public from any of our insufficiencies in behavioral pattern, then they need to break it down in departments because it would be too hard for them to manage all these people under one umbrella, which is why we have the Department of Transportation, who regulates and basically hands down enforcement of these stipulated fiduciary contracts. And then you have your Department of Health and Human Services, your Department of Public Safety. And who's in charge of all this? Like who makes these decisions? It's always going to be, in each prospective department, there's going to be a committee of professionals, people who have received their education to understand how the bigger picture works. So those committees then design these fiduciary models, they get enacted into legislation, and there you have it. Now they've made a decision for you. If you've followed that particular role throughout your life, it is presumed that you agree, and therefore here's where we're at. So this is what it means to break down. I hope it helps you understand better who you are to them, what a person actually is. And the corporations are necessary to help the departments regulate, enforce, and investigate this particular duty of care in several different ways. So a government, as you know, cannot, like a true government, cannot really operate in contract. They can't do it. So this is why we create agencies, and this is why we create or do business with corporations that can help the department to carry out its goals when it comes to these matters. So when you have Health and Human Services, they create task force. Those task force will be for different aspects of whichever peacekeeping treaty they're missioned to accomplish. So if we're talking about domestic violence and safety and well-being of the child, we have several agencies that are created by state. And so we'll have the CPS, or Child Protective Service Agency, that is designed to investigate a family for breaching this fiduciary duty of care. And if they find that you did, they will carry on their investigation throughout the course of your court case by implementing additional investigators and by providing services from service providers to help you correct this behavior that is bad. So you have the initial, I guess, the liaison. So CPS is really just a liaison. They're the ones who are supposed to coordinate all the different service providers that will help the family heal so that they can come back together again. That's supposed to be the goal of Child Protective Services. They are supposed to reunify families. And they do so by providing families with services that help the family get better wherever they're weak. So if a family is accused of doing drugs, CPS will coordinate some drug recovery service to the parent, and then the parent will have to take those courses and graduate in order to show that they have done their due diligence to meet that fiduciary obligation role. And now that they've determined the child is dependent, they must now make sure that the child receives services to help them with this emotional disturbance so that they will not be, or they will not have a bad outcome in the future and somehow not be able to function in society in the future. So that's your fiduciary model. And again, they're departmentalized within each department of the United States, of your state. So there's your corporate relationship. Really comes from when you sign contracts, or sometimes even when you acquiesce, that allows for them to do these inspections or investigations of your person. So that's why you have not 100% of your privacy in act, because when you take services from the government, a lot of it has a contingency basis stipulated that when you are going to take our services, you will also agree that we can monitor your family to make sure that the service that we provide is given to the beneficiary and not abused, because we can't trust you in your financial person either. You know, if you have demonstrated that you are financially irresponsible, now we can see that because the Department of Commerce and Financial Regulations, they've all collected all that data about you throughout your life. Perhaps you got too many credit cards. Perhaps you have too much debt. It could be just as simple as that to determine that you're not really capable of handling your financial affairs in a meaningful way that is beneficial to society. Because when we all get together and create too much debt, it harms our economy, it harms our society. So it's kind of a hamster wheel of chaos, because we didn't know what we were doing when we first started engaging in all these contracts with these people. And the very bottom line contract, the initial one, is the Social Security, because you're agreeing to secure the social health and well-being of all people you live around, societal civics, right? So if I am conducting myself in a way that harms that social economic system, then they have to intervene to protect the public, not me. But before they intervene in a way that places punishment on me, they first must make an attempt to help me in case it's not, you know, a deliberate, willful, malicious act, but rather just the lack of knowledge and understanding and I guess immaturity that led me to breach this fiduciary duty. So I hope that breaks it down in a way that makes it a little bit more clear. We'll get more in depth and in detail again in the next video, but I just wanted to show you that each of your so-called persons is a regulated occupation, and that the man or woman forfeited a portion of their rights with each person's creation. So when you were a man or woman, you were born free. When you accepted citizenship, you gave up some of those freedoms in exchange for liberty. And the reason is because if you were 100% free, you couldn't really successfully live in society, because a 100% free man would be able to go punch someone in their face and walk away from it because he's free to do so. So we have to forfeit a portion of our rights in order to keep our neighbors healthy and happy. And therefore, I have basically given up a portion of my freedom in exchange for the liberty, because I'm not going to go out there and just punch someone in their face. You know, I'm not going to just go walk away from that. That's obviously a good idea not to do if you want to live in what they call a civilized society. And that is the whole structure of the United States constitutional government in a nutshell. So when we start forfeiting those rights, we have to really determine if it's reasonable, conscionable, and if the goal, the end goal, is possibly set a bit too high. Because if we look at all the regulation in regards to, say, parenting, I don't believe all of that is necessary. If you ever read through what they expect, I think that the expectation is way too high, unreasonable, and I don't believe that the state has a superior interest in most of what they speak upon, which is something that we're going to get into in the future as well. So when we have these so-called parental rights and we are entrusted to act in the best interest of the child, when we breach that so-called, or when they believe we have breached that so-called fiduciary duty, then this is where we can review, does the state have a superior right to intervene, or does the mom and dad have a superior right, or does the child have a superior right? And when the state's superior interest in intervention doesn't exist, then that's how we can start building up and fighting against them, because in most cases it really doesn't. So that is just a rundown overview of what it means to have a person, corporations that govern the information of the persons in order to keep track of the outcome of the person's life. And if there's any questions, let us know in the comment section below. Make sure that you click the like button and subscribe if you found this to be helpful information and want to hear more. And we're always looking to, like I said, if you have questions or want to know more detail, I actually did this video because one of our listeners had a little bit more questions involving this, so I kind of wanted to cover that base. Oh, and while I'm on that, actually, he did ask about if the doctors and stuff were judges. And the answer to that is yes. in natural law, hell yes. So although they're not sitting there with the black robe on, the doctors are acting as judges in the sense that they are judging the way we behave above God, actually. So if a guy, you know, who has this professional degree and knowledge says this is how you should behave, and if you don't behave this way, you're not behaving correctly, that's a judgment. So yes, they are kind of judging us, and well, not kind of, they are judging us, and they think themselves to be superior to us, so that's a judgment in and of itself. And they think that they, with that superior knowledge, that they should rule over us. So is that judgment? Absolutely, it's judgment. But is it moral? Is it real? And the answer to me is no. because I don't put my faith in man. So why would I listen to some scientist, professional, who's collected data or stolen all this data from people over decades? And how do I know if he was willing to conceal the fact that he's doing these kinds of research projects over me and my children? Then how do I know his conclusive science is legitimate or honest in any way, shape, or form? How do I know that he doesn't come to these conclusions because he has an ego problem? I'm not going to rely on that. That's silly. So yeah, he's trying to be a judge, but in reality, is he? I would say no, not my judge. At least I have but one judge, and it's not a doctor. So actually, you know what? Before we end this video, let me just grab a case if you're interested in learning a little bit more about how the doctors see themselves as being your judges. I actually have a really good case, so I'm going to put you on pause real quick and find it so I can show it to you. Okay, so found the case, and this is in Illinois, and this is actually among several universities and hospitals that this case is being brought against. There are, I think, 4 children, if I recall, that are involved at the hospital where they had told the hospital in advance that they would not be taking the eye drops or the vitamin K shots for their babies. This is an informed decision that the parent has a right to make in our state. They determined they weren't going to do it, and throughout the course of their denying these injections and drops, they were harassed by nurses and doctors alike, basically trying to coerce and guilt them into giving their babies these treatments that they were much against. At least one of the couples were a pastor and his wife. So there were religious implications that deterred him from wanting these types of treatments given to his baby. So he said no. Well, the doctor in these hospitals, these doctors, basically forced them and threatened them if they didn't take these treatments that they would remove their children. And this is where the doctor way oversteps his boundaries. And he's actually caught on tape with the Illinois Department of Public Health committee that comes together to develop the regulations based on, you know, what parents are supposed to give their children in regards to vaccines and medical care. So they actually caught them on tape, the doctor encouraging the committee to do his will. And it's crazy. I'll read it to you right here. So woman number 2, let me see, I think that started somewhere else. Let me just double check. All right. So no, this is just talking about how they were at this committee, and this is a transcript of it. So woman number 2, on the wording on this, and I actually just texted our neonatologist because he wanted to be here and couldn't. We are a little concerned that it's saying, quote, the hospitals will, but it says DCFS may, mandating hospitals to do things, but giving DCFS options to do things. So then that puts the hospital in a little bit of a problem, because I don't think hospitals want to be taking over custody all the time, and then DCFS may investigate for medical neglect. Woman number 1, it's the issue is whether you are mandated to give vitamin K by taking protective custody. This is what this does. It doesn't mean that DCFS has to say the parent can't be the parent, but it gives you the chance to give the child vitamin K through DCFS. Undetermined man says correct. So woman number 1 says, so I think it's okay. You don't need every parent to be accused of medical neglect and investigated. You need the right to give the vitamin K, which DCFS will provide the custody for with this consistent message. Mr. Leitner, I think you want the wiggle room of the may on the DCFS side, because what I've heard is if they are automatically slapped with medical neglect, there's all sorts of ramifications there. So you want DCFS to have that, because if it's shall, man 3 cuts in, please clarify if DCFS says, no, we're not going to investigate, but the hospital has taken, woman number 1, you can take Protective custody is just the right to do what you think is right for the baby. And DCFS, if they say, yes, that we agree with you because this is our rule, you give the vitamin K, and then do any of us really care what happens next? No. But can they sue you then? No, because you took protective custody. That's the part that we have to assure with DCFS. Then when we do this, need DCFS to assure you. Yes, that's what I mean. DCFS has to say, this is our protocol, no matter what else we do, then you're protected. At what point does protective custody stop? Right after. It's 2 minutes or whatever it is. How much beyond? As soon as you give the injection. Is it 2 minutes? Is it 10 minutes? Do we wait until DCFS says we're coming or we are not coming? They don't have to come. I think protective custody is you just claim that you have done it. And she would be correct, my friends. She would be oh so very correct. So we take child protective custody away from the parent behind the scenes. Doesn't necessarily mean that we are going to show the parent that we took that protective custody, because this is paperwork. It can all be done behind the scenes. So while you're at the hospital, you have forfeited your right to 100% of the medical decision making for you and your child. And this is what makes the doctors, I guess what we were talking about earlier, kind of like a judge at that moment. It's his duty to report anything that he feels puts the child in danger or that the child has been abused through the Mandating Report Act. So that makes him an investigator on behalf of the government. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law, even if it's just your doctor. So what happened here is CPS intervened with some of these families. Only one of the women were able to fight them off. Actually, she had to call the police and get the police to protect her and her baby from the doctor taking her baby. And they actually had to stay there with her just to assure that that wouldn't occur. And then they even planned on walking her out so to make sure that the doctor didn't steal her baby. This is how much power they have. So now you have these doctors sitting at these committees where they are plotting ways to force an illegal force of injection and medical prescription. It's just horrendous. It's disgusting. But this is the kind of influence these doctors have on these committees, because these are friends. These are people who are with professional opinions that you don't know what you're doing and they know best, and they have the power and authority to make you do whatever it is they want you to do because of their experience and expertise. And if you don't, then they will exercise their authority of the state or power of the state to take away your liberty, your property, your well-being. So yes, are they judges? Absolutely. But just like I said, not in the sense of the robed judges. So who's in trouble here? Who's responsible for this? The university, the university, the university. So these particular group of practitioners, doctors, that's where they come from every single time. These people have implanted, I forgot what they're called. They're abuse pediatricians. They have a name. They actually implant them in each hospital in order for them to look for parents that are just as horribly behaved as these 4 parents refusing procedures on otherwise healthy babies. These parents' lives were destroyed because a lot of doctors, it wasn't just one, sorry, because this is spread out amongst other hospitals too. So simply because a bunch of doctors decided that they didn't like parents not taking their advice and listening to them, because they don't like the fact that the parents were disobedient to them, they actually took some of these babies away. And these babies in their very beginning phase of life didn't have their mommies to breastfeed and to nurture. That's huge. That's horrible. But this is where these so-called executive powers come from. So I hope that's very, very clear and understandable. When you deal with any agent of any government corporation that collects any data about you and shares that data with other agencies, this is what you're dealing with. They are always investigating, they are always observing, and they will always have some sort of power granted to them by state to intervene in your life in an adverse way like this. So you have to be very, very protective of your privacy. And we have to be even more careful now about when we entrust these agents and agencies with this kind of information, because this is what they intend on doing with it. It's just the way it is. But most of us don't know that. So hopefully, as we learn this and everyone gets to know this is how it works, we'll get better in the future about protecting our privacies, our freedoms, our liberties, and all of those things, and especially our kids. So again, and if there's any questions or need any clarification, just let me know in the comment section below, and I'll do my best to clarify. Look forward to more videos in regards to this type of relationship and agency, because I'm going to get deeper into it so that you really have 100% clear understanding about how you get locked up with these people in the most unconscionable way. And if you can see that before it happens, hopefully we can prevent some occurrences like this in the future. But go ahead and share this video, like it again, and we hope to see you in the next one. And everybody have a fantastic day.